Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the museum at Lassen's Resort. I am Julie Cezada. I'm the Executive Director here at the Cedar Lake Historical Association. We are so happy to have you out here today for our presentation. Today we are going to be hearing from Professor Ted Karamanski from Loyola University. He is here to present On Native Ground, the Calumet region's Native American roots. And this is part of the Indigenous History Grant that we received from Indiana Humanities in cooperation with the National Endowment for the Humanities. So we're so happy to continue this series and bring you new and different elements of Indigenous history here in our region. A couple of announcements though before we continue on. I want to remind you of the sunset dinner cruises that are still going on here at Cedar Lake with Chef Eric. And of course our steamboat rides are continuing. We will be riding, or I should say steaming across the beautiful lake until the end of September. Now we have just added 2 extra dates in September as well. So normally we run just on Wednesdays. We're also going to be operating on one Saturday, September 7th, as well as a couple of rides on Tuesday, September 24th. So if you're interested in coming for a steamboat ride, please stop out. The reason we added those rides on Tuesday, September 24th is because we are having an educators open house. Now this is a first for us here at Lassen's and we're really excited. Hope that you will help us spread the word to any educators that you know here in Lake County, teaching kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. On Tuesday, September 24th from 3:30 to 6 o'clock, they are welcome to come out here. Chef Eric's going to prepare some samples of our Potawatomi sweet dip and our signature popcorn. And then we would also like teachers to pre-register if they're interested in taking a steamboat ride. So there'll be 5 times to choose from throughout the afternoon, and that just requires a pre-registration with their school email. So please help us spread the word about that. A couple of other fall highlights that I want to share with you. We're going to have our behind the scenes museum tour like we do every year, once a year. That is on Sunday, September 15th. We also have another Indiana Humanities Indigenous History program that we're going to be hosting. That's going to be a children's story hour with a craft. So we have one of our local teachers who is a volunteer here, and she's going to help us put on that program for some children on Sunday, September 29th. Then, Flavors of Fall. This is a new one for us. We're going to pilot this from October 5th and 6th. Chef Eric is going to be preparing 3 signature soups. He's going to be making an Oktoberfest cheddar beer brat soup. And he's also, cheddar brat beer, I think I said it backwards. He's also going to be making our Lassen's chicken dumpling, as well as a Potawatomi inspired butternut squash. And then those will be served with some hearty breads, and I believe he's also going to be making some apple cider. So come on out to taste these amazing foods, but also we want to do a pumpkin pie bake-off. So we're encouraging our members and anyone really who wants to participate to sign up, pre-register, and let us know that you were bringing in a pie for our judges to taste and sample. We're also working on having some of our children's games available and maybe even some live entertainment. So mark the dates of October 5th and 6th and come on up for our Flavors of Fall. What else to share with you? Through to October 6th. The Calumet Voices National Stories exhibition is still going on. Of course, our ice truck is up there on display, as well as some other Cedar Lake artifacts. We hope you'll visit the Indiana Welcome Center up there in Hammond and have a look at everything that there is to see. And October 12th, our 4th annual Track the Past Family Train Day is a free day to come and experience a couple of different, actually I think 7 different train layouts. Some modelers bring in and set up all throughout the museum. Wonderful day of family fun, so please plan on doing that with us. And then on October 13th, we're actually going to be hosting for the first time a book study. This is also funded through our Indiana Humanities grant with Indigenous History Focus. We're going to be reading Braiding Sweetgrass. This is a book by Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is a Potawatomi citizen, and she has written a book. The subtitle is Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. So she's written a version for adults as well as young adults. So you should read the book in advance and then join us on this afternoon, October 13th, at either 2 p.m. for adults or 4 p.m. for young adults. And we'll be doing a facilitated book study to explore the concepts and themes that are brought up in that book. So kind of tying in a little bit of our culinary anthropology as well with this Indigenous history. So we hope that you'll sign up and join us. So just visit our website, which is at lassensresort.org. Sign up for these or any of the other programs that I just mentioned. And now let me introduce Professor Ted Karamanski.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for coming by. It's a glorious day out there, and there's obviously lots of other recreational opportunities. But we have a few have decided to forego that fun in the sun, and so I appreciate you being here. So let's talk about the Indian heritage of the Calumet region. And one of the most important things, I think, to understand about the native people in the Midwest, in the environment, is that, you know, the Great Lakes are this tremendous natural resource, huge, you know, 94,000 square miles of open water, the largest amount of open fresh water in the world. You can see this from outer space. Now, unlike most natural features you can see from outer space, this one is totally encapsulated in human history. So when there were these mile or even 2 mile thick ice sheets that had carved out the basin of the Great Lakes, as they began to recede, native people were here. They were here before the Great Lakes existed as we know them. And so throughout you can look at the wide changes in the lakes. When the lakes retreated 7,000 years ago, native people were living here. And so where are their villages? Their villages were along the edges of the lake, now hundreds of feet underwater. So we'll never know the full range and richness of native history in the region, because for most of it, it's covered by the lake. For hundreds, even thousands of years of it are covered by the lake. There was the final Chicago, they call it the Chicago stage, at 4,000 years ago, when the lake was larger than it is today. And this had a huge impact then on the landscape of what we call the Calumet region. Over time, the lake gradually retreated. And at each little stage, it left behind the remnants of the old beach. These became what are called the beach ridges. And they were central to the settlement of the Calumet region, because these were slightly elevated areas. So this is where native people built their villages. This is where the first settlers built their cabins and set up their fields, agricultural fields. This is where the original roads were located, along these beach ridges. This is a map that was done by an amateur archaeologist at the turn of the 20th century. And he identified Native American settlements, at least on the Illinois side of the Calumet region. And all of these are located near sources of water, because it's like a logical thing. Where you're going to live, the one thing you need every day is water. And you're not going to be, it's heavy, you're not going to be lugging it too far. So archaeologists, when they're looking for Native American habitation sites, are looking almost exclusively near sources of water, whether it's the Little Calumet River, whether it's Calumet, Lake Calumet, or Wolf Lake, or Cedar Lake. The remarkable thing about the Calumet region, and what really was a determining factor in Native American life, is that, particularly because of those beach ridges, and you can see there's the ridges and the swales in between. Now eventually, of course, what they did when European farmers came in here is they drained that wetland between the two bridges, beach ridges, and we don't have a sense of that wetland any longer. However, back when Native people dominated the landscape, it was a critical thing. Okay, you got your village, your campsite on the ridge, but now you were in something that ecologists call an ecotone. An ecotone is where 2 or 3 different environmental zones are close together. And this is a really preferred place to live, because it allows you to exploit, with very little movement, several different environmental areas. So you could take advantage of Lake Michigan, say for fishing. You could use the tall grass prairie for the wet areas, for hunting waterfowl, or trapping beaver or muskrat, or you could exploit the wooded areas for deer or other game harvesting, as we'll see. A wide variety of plant species in the Calumet area. Now, more than from archaeology, we can learn about the lifestyles of the native people from the accounts of the first Europeans that came here. Now, there's a process they call ethnohistory. And ethnohistory is, we're going to use the accounts by these white settlers coming in, but we're going to factor in the kind of biases they had. That it was part of the way they recorded information. We'll try to factor that out to then get a sense as to how Native American life went on. And Solon Robinson was one of the first settlers, wasn't the first because there were the fur traders, which we'll talk about in a bit. But he was founded Crown Point, Indiana, had a trading post with the Potawatomi, and later founded this squatters union that helped a lot of the farmers be able to buy their land at rock bottom federal rates. But he also left an account of the Native Americans. And so, looking at the Potawatomi who were trading with him at his store, he noted families occupy perhaps a dozen different spots in a year. In winter, they generally select some romantically sheltered spot near a lake and a stream. In summer, they reverse the order, camping on the highest knobs and most airy points in groves on those beach ridges. And though rarely planting a small patch of corn. Here we see some of the bias. Rarely were they planting. No, they were planting on a regular basis. They were skilled agriculturalists. They weren't looking for romantic places in winter. They were just looking for a sheltered place. Key to the Native American use of the land is mobility. We are a very fixed sort of people, okay? Recently, one of the presidential candidates talked about we need to go ahead and make housing more affordable, because this is the American dream, is to own your own home. And in our home, we have all kinds of fixtures, of course, but we have all sorts of our things that Amazon is delivering to us on a regular basis. We accumulate lots of things because we have a fixed place to be. For Native Americans, it was different. They did not accumulate a lot of material goods. They didn't value having a wide range of material goods. And this facilitated their lifestyle, which was to move regularly throughout the season and exploit different areas of the environment at their peak opportunities for resources. This created a misapprehension from the Europeans came in here because they said, oh, they're just wandering. They weren't wandering, they were exploiting the environment in a different way. So in the summer, for example, they would follow, as Solon Robinson noted, they would follow the rhythms of the season. During summer, they formed large villages along streams and rivers. They planted small fields of beans, peas, squashes, pumpkins, and in particular, the Three Sisters. You would plant corn, which would grow into a large stalk. You'd plant beans next to it, and the beans would use the stalk to go for the vine and the beans to grow up, and then finally squash at the bottom. The squash of the native people had a branch that had little hairy spikes on it, those hairy spikes would keep the mice and other vermin from going ahead and molesting the crop. And while the resources that the corn took out of the ground, the peas would put back in. So they could, for many more years, without using artificial fertilizers, harvest the same land. Autumn was a time when they could exploit perhaps the most distinctive Native American crop that we use or know about today, and that was wild rice. It's not really a rice, it's more like an oat family actually, but it would grow in waters that were stable at a certain level of 3, 4, 5 feet, and they would go along in with their canoe, and here she's using an oar, other times it would just be a special stick, and they would knock the rice off the top of the grass. That was a hugely important food source because it was easily stored and they could use it throughout the season. What you see here is a map of the Calumet region today, but superimposed on there in the lime green color, these are areas that Native Americans had used to exploit for wild rice. Many of them, you can't grow wild rice there today because the water levels are not consistent and the rice crop gets killed. But you can see in the Calumet area how intensive the opportunity was to harvest wild rice. Another thing they could harvest from those same wet lands that wild rice grew in was cranberries. And again, quoting from Solon Robinson, hundreds and hundreds of bushels of cranberries were gathered and sent off in wagon loads to the nearest market. So this would have been in the 1840s, 1850s even, when you have farmers coming in and setting up. Indians who were still in the area would have been using traditional methods to harvest cranberries, and they could then have a market product to get a little cash. So winter, they're not looking for a romantic place, but they're looking for a good, secure place. In among the trees, keep away from the breeze. You don't want to be down by the lake shore in a winter. Anybody who goes to Grant Park in December knows that. And then spring was a very important time because there they could harvest probably the other, besides wild rice, the crop that we still exploit ourselves, and that's maple syrup. And they would, Solon Robinson, again talking about Lake County, adjoining the Door Prairie, so that's LaPorte, adjoining the Door Prairie on the north is a very large body of sugar tree timber. Indians have many excellent sugar camps there. And so what they would do is, of course, tap the sap, but then you have to boil the sap till the moisture's out and you have a granulated product of sugar that then is easily preserved for a long period of time. And that would then be part of their diet throughout the year. If you're making a stew, you might throw in some of your maple sugar. If you were having a council, a meeting of leaders from different bands, they would go ahead and put in the center of where the meeting was a boiling cauldron in which they would put a large amount of maple sugar for a beverage that people would share. He then goes on to say they had these large copper and brass kettles that they got from fur traders. But when they didn't need them anymore, because their lifestyle is based on mobility, they don't want to be carrying around big cauldrons for making maple sugar. When they were done using them, they would bury them right there near the trees, and they knew where that was, and then in the spring they could come and excavate it and use it again. So Kyle White, who's a member of the citizen band of the Potawatomi, this is the branch of Potawatomi that are in Kansas today, but traditionally lived in the Calumet region. And he talks about how this course of movement through the seasons, he refers to it as curating the environment, which is exploiting it, but also trying to do so in a way that was sustainable, because you weren't staying in one place and exhausting the resource there. And he says, in our seasonal round system, a part of what makes it work is what humans do, but another part involves ecological conditions that interact reciprocally with what humans do. You go out into the forest in the Calumet area today, to the forest preserves in that, and you're walking along. We are so blind to what we see. Oh, there's trees, there's some weeds, there's a grass, oh, there's a nice flower. You know, that's about as far as my knowledge takes me of the environment I'm seeing. Indians in the Calumet region utilize 487 different plants for food, for medicine, and this was flowers using the bulbs of some plants, the bark of certain trees. Fruits, of course, make sense. Nuts were very important. This is Native American women had a very sophisticated understanding of what you could harvest, where, and when. And all this was integrated into their diet, but also into their pharmacological knowledge. And the healers in the Potawatomi community often were members of an elite group called the Midawaywen. This was a semi-secret organization of people who had elite knowledge. And the only way they got this elite knowledge was through gradually being trained by a veteran midday priest. And they weren't doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. So if you went to a midday priest and you said, okay, I really feel that I can be a healer, train me. You had to pay for the privilege. And it wasn't so much like giving them money and all that, but you had to provide benefits to that person. And then gradually, as you see here, we see a young initiate going ahead and being introduced into the Midawaywen as having mastered the knowledge to be able to utilize all these different plants, knowing what to do when somebody has an intestinal problem, knowing what to do when somebody has a headache, and so forth. Now, all this comes from a deep, deep knowledge of the environment they lived in. And okay, I've been living in this environment for more than half a century. Wish it was a half century. I'd be out there swimming right now. But I only know what I've read in books and that sort of thing. What the Potawatomi had and other native people before them who lived in the area, what they had was this knowledge that was passed down that began 1,000 years before. So it was a very sophisticated system, but it was all passed down orally. And so today, sadly, even among people that are midday priests today, a lot of it is lost, because such a large percentage of the Potawatomi people who had lived here and had this very sophisticated, they're in Kansas. And so it's a whole different environment there. And so a lot gets lost over time. Now, an important thing to also understand about Native Americans is that they did not have an ecological understanding of the environment. They believed that the world around them was a spiritual place, which is to say, it was filled with spirits. That lake has its own unique spirit. But also, the rocks on the ground, that tree has its own unique spirit. Every animal has its own unique spirit. And so, you want to build a lodge and cut down the tree? You're killing a spirit. So, that's okay though, but you have to do it in the right way. You have to appease the spirit. And so, to have a good relationship with the environment didn't mean you weren't cutting down trees, you weren't killing animals. It meant that you were instead following through with proper rituals and acknowledging and thanking these spirits so that you could successfully exploit them again in the future. That's very different than having an ecological understanding that when we're at our best, we have about the environment, looking at specific interactions of things in nature. This worked for and against Native people. So a lot of times when people think American Indians, they're like natural ecologists. No, they had a different way of looking at the environment, respecting the spirit and the spirits of the land. But, whoops, it didn't stop them from making mistakes. So Indians participated in the exploration of beaver in this area when they get involved in the fur trade. Because they would kill a beaver, they would follow the right rituals to appease its spirit and expect that there'd be more beavers there in future. Well, at a certain point, that's not going to happen. And when we have an ecological understanding, we'll appreciate why. You're kind of overhunting something. Anyway, I shouldn't have gone to this slide, but anyway, it's an important one. So here's the Calumet region at the bottom of Lake Michigan with Potawatomi there. That's like the most recent group of Native. But throughout the years, there were many different Native groups who passed through here because we are talking about an area that's right on the Continental Divide. But all these different groups, the Ho-Chunk, the Miami, the Illinois, the Odawa, the Ojibwa, all passing through here in various times and could have had villages here temporarily. The Potawatomi come in fairly late, in basically the end of the 17th century, beginning of the 18th century. The first reference to the Calumet region in a European document, it's 1755, so it's very, very late. And this map made by John Mitchell, who was a British cartographer. And he, right here you can see where he wrote it down, describes the region as the Croix de Chez. And he gets that name from the Iroquois, because the English were closely allied to the Iroquois Confederacy in upstate New York. And the Iroquois claimed this whole area as their territory because of attacks in the 17th century on the Illinois Indians and others. But once the Iroquois couldn't range this far west, that Potawatomi came in. And Calumet is basically, of course, the ceremonial pipe of peace. And there's an old French word that means reed that was used basically for the stem of a pipe. And that's where the term Calumet comes from. The fur trade was the first taste of capitalism that Native people were exposed to. And it had a huge impact on them because it disrupted a lot of their traditional ways. And it was the French who came in and said, here, this is a way for you to get Because before they wanted to make maple sugar, they had to use hollowed out tree trunks that they would then try to cook the syrup in. And of course that's going to eventually burn, you're going to have to hollow out another one. All of a sudden somebody brings you a copper kettle, hey, this is good year in and year out. Same with steel tools. As the fur trade came in, it had a very important impact on the lives of Native American women in particular. There was a tradition among Native Americans that you only did business with people you could trust. And who can you trust? People who are connected to you through kinship. And so if traders wanted to have a secure relationship with Native people, and Native people wanted a secure source of European goods coming in, they would go ahead and form a nuptial relationship. And so women became the key go-betweens between the Europeans and their Indian partners. They were critical because it was women who knew how to process the furs. Okay, guy's going out there trapping it, but he's bringing it home. It's a hell of a lot of work. Anybody who's done some hunting knows that's done by women. By being married to a fur trader, they could guarantee a family access to trade goods. And a very, very important trade good for Native people, besides once they got the metal tools, which can last for what, 50, 60 years, a good metal tool. Once the Indians got that, they didn't want so much more tools, but they liked getting cotton or wool clothing. Because you can imagine, nobody's wearing leather right now. It's just not that comfortable in the summertime. And it has very poor insulation compared to, say, wool for the winter. So that was access to those goods were important. And of course, the Indian wives could guarantee their French husbands consumers. The important fur trader who came in here early was Joseph Bailey. And Bailey sets himself up at the Bailey homesteads over in the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore today. He had a series of marriages with Native American women, or women who were part Native American, part French. There had also in the area, having briefly a post near Michigan City today, was the alleged founder of Chicago, Jean-Baptiste Point DeSable. But Bailey and DeSable both, and all the other traders that came through here, were involved in something that was very negative too. One way to ensure you had a customer was to have a customer who might be addicted to a substance. And so alcohol trade had a very deleterious impact on the native population, and it was the fur traders that pushed this product. All of them did it. And high wine is like super high proof liquor. This is something that you would never even, ever clear. Or grain alcohol. This is stronger than grain alcohol. So yeah, I did mention that the beaver had been exported, and Native people didn't quite understand exactly what was happening. But the marvelous thing, there was this dark side of the fur trade, but the French came in, and they were happy to live with the Native people and to accept a lot of their values and to form families with them. That all changed following the American Revolution. We are people of what they call a settler colonial background. We're not just colonists who come from one place and live for a while and go back to their homeland. After a generation or two, the European, particularly the English colonists, thought of themselves as native to the soil. And so when pioneers came into the Midwest region, they came in as, this is our home too. We're entitled to this. A very different attitude than the French had. And so what followed was a series of wars. And the native people of the Calumet region fought fiercely to defend their homes. Now, we don't think about this as an area where there are all kinds of big Indian battles. No, they were smart enough to fight the battles further away. They understood the threat that was coming, and they won some major victories. The greatest victory ever won against the United States military by Native American people was in 1791 in northwest Ohio. The Americans never came up with a name for this battle because it decimated the United States Army. It actually had to be disbanded after this disastrous defeat. Somewhere between 600 and 1,000 Americans killed in this battle. And Custer's last stand is 279. So this is like a big defeat. But unfortunately, the leaders of the Native Alliance got a little too much ahead of their skis, and they didn't make a peace treaty after this great victory. Allowed the Americans to regroup, reform their army, and in 1794 defeat this alliance of tribes that stretched from Wisconsin into Ohio and Indiana at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. And that began the loss of native lands. Because according to that treaty, a huge section of Ohio was lost to the Americans, but more specifically, all around the Great Lakes region, specific strategic locations were identified by the United States government and in the treaty ceded to the United States, including a piece of land 6 miles square at the mouth of Chicago River, emptying into the southwest end of Lake Michigan. So right there, 1794, they were going ahead and they lost the core of what is today Chicago. And what followed was a series of what you could call salami tactics, where the Americans would just want a little bit more land. Just give us a little bit more. Well, give us a little bit more. Now let's do another treaty, give us a little bit more. And you can see how they were closing in on the region. It's one of the myths that the United States government broke its treaties with the Indians. That did happen occasionally, but mainly what they did is just come up with another treaty that superseded the last one and gave more land to the settler colonists. The last chance really for Native people in all of North America to stem the United States was in the War of 1812, which was really an Indian war. And the British had promised Tecumseh, the great leader of the Shawnee, that if they're victorious, they would create a protectorate in what we know today as Indiana. I mean, that's why it's got that name. But instead, Tecumseh was killed in 1813, and the Indian Alliance was never able to reestablish itself. In the wake of the War of 1812, then now they were asking for bigger chunks of land. Now they didn't have to worry about Indian opposition. And so the Treaty of Chicago was really the vanquishing of the Potawatomi from our region of the country, from the Calumet. And you can see how some Potawatomi resisted by fleeing north. And they went into Canada, and after a few years came back down. And in northern Wisconsin, there's something called the Forest County Band of Potawatomi. Those are people that used to live in the Calumet region, went up to Canada, and then after a few years snuck back into Wisconsin because northern Wisconsin was all trees and nobody was paying attention. But a large percentage of them, Potawatomi, were moved first to the area around Council Bluffs, Iowa, and then later to Kansas, and some even to Oklahoma. They called this the Trail of Death. It wasn't as bad as the Trail of Tears, but it was awful. An account of this as follows. This is from Father Pettit, who was a priest with them. The order of march was as follows. The United States flag carried by a United States Army Dragoon. Then the principal officers, followed by baggage carts, then a carriage, during which the whole trip was used by Indian chiefs. Then a couple of chiefs on horseback led a line of 250 to 300 horses heading west. Riding on those were men, women, and children in single file. And then on the flanks were more dragoons to make sure nobody dropped out, nobody straggled, keep everybody moving. The sick were lying in these wagons that were getting bounced along. There weren't even really roads that they were traveling on. And they were canvas covered, and far from protecting them from the dust and heat, it only deprived them of air, for they were as if buried under this burning canopy, and there several died. So 40 Indians died in the initial evacuation to Council Bluffs, Iowa, including Father Pettit, who after writing this became sick and died. His body was later taken back to the University of Notre Dame campus, where he's buried today. One group of Potawatomi, however, escaped. And they were called now today the Pokagon Potawatomi. Their leader, Leopold Pokagon, had made an alliance with the Catholic Church and had Catholic missionaries with him at the Treaty of Chicago in 1833. So when all the other Potawatomi were forced to leave the region, he was able to negotiate a series of reservations that his people could stay on. And the Pokagon Potawatomi are still to this day in southwestern Michigan. This is one of their encampments near Battle Creek, about 1900. And one of the things they did at first was they would get money from the government for agreeing to these treaties and giving away thousands and thousands of acres of land. But they used some of that money to buy specific plots of land that they thought they could perhaps live on. Unfortunately, in many cases, because they weren't actually on the land, white settlers would come along, start a farm there, and if Indians came back and said, hey, get out of here. And they didn't really protect their title. The Bailey family, remember Bailey had all these half-Indian children. And it's very interesting that some of them became fur traders like he did, and they went all the way out west to Montana and the upper Missouri country. Some went with the Potawatomi when they were expelled to Iowa and later Kansas. Others, however, a little lighter skinned, married into rich families in Chicago and became part of businesses in the city. And then others went ahead and became nuns and part of the Catholic Church. Simon Pokagon was the son of Leopold Pokagon. He got an education, and in the late 19th century, tried to go ahead and tell the people of the Calumet region the story of his people. He wrote a whole series of books. And in 1893, he was invited to the Columbian Exhibition, the Chicago World's Fair. It was celebrating the 400 years of progress since Christopher Columbus came to America. And he was asked to give an address. And he gave them an address they didn't expect. In that address, he said, on behalf of my people, the American Indians, I hereby declare to you, the pale-faced race that has usurped our lands and homes, that we have no spirit to celebrate with you the great Columbian Fair now being held in this Chicago city wonder of the world. No sooner would we hold high joy day over the graves of our departed than to celebrate our own funeral, the discovery of America. And while your hearts in admiration rejoice over the beauty and grandeur of this young republic, and you say, behold, the wonders wrought by our children in this foreign land, do not forget that this success has been at the sacrifice of our homes and our once happy race. They didn't invite him back a second time. Today, the Pokagon Band has tried to reestablish a presence in the region. And when I say the region now, not just the Calumet, but into southwest Michigan. And they have made purchases, over 6,000 acres of land that they are trying to manage in a traditional way, and to try to bring back some of the indigenous plants that had been part of their pharmaceutical tradition. Between Lake and Porter counties, 1,500 Native Americans, according to the United States Census, still live here. Some are of the Pokagon Band, others are from tribes that came from as far away as Arizona, New Mexico, attracted by opportunities in businesses or industry. Sort of the gathering point for Native people in the Calumet region is in Chicago, the American Indian Center, founded in 1953. And as many as 100 different tribes are represented in the region, and part of that number living in Porter and Lake County. And so from their perspective, through land acknowledgement statements and else, they want to remind us that this was once native ground, and from their perspective it still is, because they still live here. Thank you.